The Shadow-Bound Atlas, an original story by Martha M.C. Jenkins. Prologue. The Echoes Beneath. The gas lamps of Altenburg cast long, trembling fingers of light across the slick cobblestones, painting the familiar urban sprawl in a sepia-toned illusion of safety. Above, life thrummed, carriages clattered, merchants barked, and the distant, muffled laughter of a pub spilled onto the street. But below, a deeper, older pulse beat, a rhythm of slow decay and forgotten whispers, a heart of darkness known simply as the Warren. Max Thorn stood at the precipice of that unseen world, a man etched with the twin scars of grief and disgrace. His anorak, patched and worn, hung loosely on his frame, a poor camouflage for the hollows beneath his eyes. He lifted a custom-built sonic scanner, its polished bronze casing catching the faint glow of his headlamp, and watched the digital readout. Below, the city's meticulously documented sewage system quickly gave way to chaotic, uncatalogued voids, the true realm of the Warren. He had promised himself, and the ghost of his lost partner, that he would map every inch of it. A fool's errand, perhaps, but a desperate one. Redemption, he believed, lay buried within the suffocating earth, just as his past lay buried beneath the rubble of a forgotten cave-in. He would bring light to the darkness, order to the chaos. He would conquer this unseen world or die trying, and tonight he would begin his descent. Chapter 1. The Descent into Formless Depths. The air hit Max first, a cold, damp breath laced with the stench of ancient earth, metallic minerals, and something indefinably organic like wet stone breathing slow. He ducked through a narrow breach in a forgotten Victorian foundation, a crack that had widened with time and neglect, leading into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. His headlamp beam sliced through it, revealing a tunnel of rough-hewn rock, far older than any city architect would acknowledge. His bespoke mapping rig, Charon, a grim nod to the ferryman of the dead, hummed softly against his chest. It was a marvel of miniaturized tech, LiDAR scanners, ground-penetrating radar, atmospheric sensors, and, most uniquely, a suite of highly sensitive psychic resonance detectors, a controversial addition he'd built after his last ill-fated expedition. He called it his whisper catcher. Tonight, it felt less like a tool and more like an extension of his own frayed nerves. The further he moved, the less the Warren resembled anything man-made. Passages twisted at impossible angles, some too narrow for a human, others opening into vast, echoing caverns whose ceilings vanished into the black. The craftsmanship, if one could call it that, was crude, yet somehow deliberate, the stone worn smooth by eons of unseen currents, or something else. Max's mapping tablet, linked to Sharon, displayed a real-time, three-dimensional rendering of his surroundings, a spiderweb of green lines against a black void. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. "Just focus, Thorn," he muttered, his voice swallowed by the hungry silence. "One section at a time." He activated the psychic resonance array. It was still experimental, a wild theory born from fragmented old texts and his own desperate need to understand the inexplicable phenomena that had plagued his past. The readout on his tablet flickered, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. He frowned. Expecting static, he was instead getting something, a low-frequency hum, a lingering imprint. The very stones felt alive, not with geology, but with memory. He pressed deeper, mapping, measuring, meticulously charting every angle, every fissure. Each click of his boots on the sodden earth was a declaration of intent. He would bring light. He would understand. He would finally find peace. But even then, in those initial hours, a chilling thought began to take root. These tunnels weren't merely forgotten. They felt present. Chapter 2. The Glitches in Reality. Days bled into weeks. Max surfaced only for supplies and a few hours of tortured sleep, the Warren's clammy breath still clinging to his clothes, its oppressive silence ringing in his ears. His apartment, a squalid echo of his former life, felt like an alien space compared to the subterranean labyrinth that had become his true home. His map of the Warren grew, a sprawling, intricate tapestry of green light on his high-resolution tablet. It was a masterpiece of urban exploration, a testament to his skill and his stubborn resolve. But it was also starting to scream. The anomalies began subtly. A sudden, impossible bend in a passage he knew for a fact was straight. A cavern whose dimensions impossibly shifted on the map between scans. He'd dismiss it as a software glitch, a sensor malfunction, but the frequency increased. Then came the temporal echoes, Sharon's resonance detectors picking up fleeting phantom images on the screen. A flicker of what looked like ancient robed figures moving through the stone, or a glimpse of a different, more colossal architecture superimposed over the current one. Residual psychic energy, he'd rationalize, his voice thin in the echoing darkness. Just echoes of the past, imprinted on the stone, like a recording. But the recordings grew clearer, more insistent. He started hearing faint whispers, not with his ears, but inside his head. A chorus of unintelligible voices that sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. His sanity, always a precarious thing since the incident, began to fray. He slept less, convinced the whispers followed him even above ground. His dreams were a vortex of impossible geometries and suffocating dread. The Warren wasn't just below Altenburg. It was seeping into his mind. He remembered the accident, the cave-in that had claimed his partner, Lena. The sudden, unearthly shriek, the feeling of the earth itself groaning in protest. He had dismissed it as panic, as the trauma of loss. Now, the whispers in the Warren made him wonder if he'd been wrong. Had something else been at play? Had he been too blind to see the true nature of the earth beneath their feet? Chapter 3. The Lure of the Deep. The Warren was no longer passive. It was reaching out. Max felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force drawing him down specific passages, always deeper. His mapping tools, meant to observe, were now participating. The glitches in his digital interface weren't random. They felt deliberate. Arrows would appear, guiding him. Impossible symbols would momentarily flash across the screen, then vanish. He found himself standing before a wall of perfectly uniform, obsidian-like rock, impossibly smooth, devoid of any tool marks. It wasn't natural. It wasn't Victorian. It wasn't human. Sharon's resonance detectors went wild, the display a furious riot of color and impossible frequencies. The whispers escalated, not a chorus now, but a single insistent voice, a dry hiss that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Deeper. Max pressed his hand against the cold, smooth surface. He felt a faint vibration, not of stone, but of something alive, something that pulsed with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. His rational mind screamed at him to retreat, to run from this impossible place. But another voice, a quieter, more insidious one, urged him forward. It was the promise of answers, the lure of revelation, and, he admitted to himself, the seductive, terrifying thought that Lena's ghost might be found here too, caught in the echoes. He noticed strange carvings on the obsidian, not pictograms, but complex fractal patterns that seemed to shift and reform as he looked at them. They defied logic, defied human artistry. They were equations, not mathematical, but existential. They spoke of energies, of transferences, of connections. His internal monologue became a fractured dialogue. Was he mapping the Warren, or was the Warren mapping him? Was he exploring, or was he being lured? Chapter 4. The Core Revelation. The obsidian wall was not a wall. It was a door, or perhaps a membrane. Max hadn't opened it. It had simply receded. He found himself in a chamber of impossible scale, its ceiling lost in the high darkness, its floor sloping downwards into a central pulsating void. The air here was thick, heavy with an almost palpable pressure, like standing at the bottom of a crushing ocean. Charon went completely insane. The display overloaded, then reformed, not showing a map, but projecting visions directly into the air before him, a holographic nightmare. The truth. The images flickered, frantic and horrifying. He saw colossal, impossibly ancient beings, not of flesh and blood, but of swirling shadow and coherent thought, their forms vaguely pyramidal, their minds vast and cold. They were the architects, not of stone, but of purpose. It wasn't built to house anything. It was the thing. An ancient, malevolent intelligence from beyond the stars, a parasitic consciousness that had landed on Earth in its primordial infancy, too weak to move, too alien to sustain itself. It had learned to feed, slowly, insidiously, on the burgeoning psychic energy of nascent life, on the primal fears and desires of early humans. The tunnels, the very stone, had been manipulated by its will, growing like mycelial networks beneath the earth, designed to harvest and process the concentrated psychic residue of human civilization above. Altenburg, the gas lamp-lit city, was merely its most recent, most potent feeding ground. The whispers Max had detected were not echoes of the past. They were the constant, agonizing digestion of countless lost minds, the low hum of the entity absorbing its sustenance. His mapping tools, his whisper catcher, hadn't just amplified residual energy. By their meticulous, invasive nature, they had actively fed the entity. They had focused its awareness, brought its ancient, slumbering consciousness into sharper, more terrifying focus. He wasn't mapping a forgotten world. He was kickstarting a millennia-old digestive system, rousing the primal hunger of a god. And now it was awake. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. The chamber pulsed, the air vibrating with a guttural, wet sound that was both a roar and a whisper. The images from Charon solidified, not just projections, but actual spectral forms writhing through the air, the tormented faces of those the Warren had consumed, their eyes wide with eternal terror. Max stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. He understood too much. The entity wasn't just in the Warren, it was the Warren, a monstrous, sprawling consciousness that had used human hands, human fear, and now human technology to fully awaken. His act of charting, of seeking to bring order, had instead brought a cataclysm. The passages behind him began to shift, walls of rock groaning and grinding, sealing off his escape. The tunnels weren't merely responding to his presence, they were actively hunting him. The whispers became individual voices, echoing Lena's name, mocking his quest for redemption. "You fed it, Max. You fed us all to it." He scrambled, trying to navigate the map on his tablet, but the display was a chaotic mess of impossibly shifting geometries. Passages he had meticulously charted winked out of existence, replaced by new ones that twisted and spiraled into madness. The very coordinates of reality were unraveling around him. A cold, unseen tendril brushed his mind, a probing, alien intelligence that sought to strip away his every secret, every fear. He saw Lena's face, smiling, then screaming as the cave collapsed. He saw his own guilt, raw and bleeding. The entity was not just consuming his body, it was consuming his soul, his memories, his very identity. He ran, stumbling through the oppressive darkness, guided by instinct more than sight. The warren was closing in, its stony embrace growing tighter, hungrier. He was an irritant, a morsel, a final, fascinating morsel that had inadvertently offered itself as the key to its full awakening. The entity's purpose, he now understood, was not merely to exist. It was to expand, to consume all psychic energy, until Altenburg itself became nothing more than a psychic battery, its inhabitants blissfully unaware of the horror that writhed beneath their feet. Chapter 6. Redemption in Ruin. Cornered in a small, damp alcove, Max slumped against the cold stone, Sharon still clutched in his trembling hands. The entity's presence was overwhelming, a crushing weight on his mind, twisting his thoughts into frantic, self-loathing coils. He could feel it attempting to shatter his consciousness, to absorb him into its vast, tormented network. Redemption. He had come for redemption. But what was redemption in the face of a cosmic horror? To become another forgotten ghost, another psychic echo in this monstrous digestive tract? No. Lena's face, clear and strong in his mind now, gave him a final, desperate surge of clarity. He may have led them to this, but he could, perhaps, prevent it from spreading. He looked at Sharon, his bespoke mapping tool. It was his creation, the instrument of his downfall, but also the most potent amplifier of psychic energy he possessed. It had woken the beast. Could it, perhaps, put it back to sleep? Or, at the very least, disrupt its awakening? With trembling fingers, he reprogrammed Sharon. He wouldn't map the warren. He would unmap it. He would overload its sensory organs, its tendrils of consciousness. He would turn its own amplified energy against itself. He focused its resonance emitters, not to detect, but to blast outwards. He set the frequency not to record, but to feedback, to create a deafening scream of psychic static, a white noise capable of overwhelming even this ancient intelligence. He aimed the device at the swirling, pulsating heart of the chamber, the nexus of the entity's being. The whispers in his head turned to shrieks of rage, the very stone vibrating with furious resistance. The warren recoiled, its tendrils lashing out, spectral claws tearing at his mind. But Max held firm, his gaunt face set in grim determination. "If I'm going to be a ghost," he rasped, "I'll be a screaming one." He activated the feedback loop. A cacophony of sound exploded, not just in his ears, but in every fiber of his being. The air shimmered, the spectral forms of the consumed masses convulsed, their screams merging with the raw, amplified psychic shriek emanating from Sharon. The obsidian walls of the chamber cracked, fissures racing across its smooth surface like lightning. The warren howled, a sound that spoke of unimaginable pain, of an ancient entity being torn from within. Max felt his mind tearing, his memories scattering like dust. The images of Lena, of his life above, of everything he was, they blurred, melted, and reformed into impossibly twisted shapes. The feedback loop was consuming him too, dissolving his consciousness into the very psychic storm he had unleashed. He saw, in the fading light of his own mind, the entity recoiling, its vast consciousness struggling against the deluge of chaotic energy. It was being forced back, its tendrils retracting, its grip on Altenburg loosening. His sacrifice was working. The awakening was stalled, perhaps even reversed. The last thing Max perceived was a final, agonizing shriek from the warren, a sound that resonated with primal terror and ancient fury. Then, darkness. Not the darkness of the tunnels, but the darkness of utter oblivion. Max felt his mind tearing, his memories scattering like dust. The images of Lena, of his life above, of everything he was, they blurred, melted, and reformed into impossibly twisted shapes. The feedback loop was consuming him too, dissolving his consciousness into the very psychic storm he had unleashed. He saw, in the fading light of his own mind, the entity recoiling, its vast consciousness struggling against the deluge of chaotic energy. It was being forced back, its tendrils retracting, its grip on Altenburg loosening. His sacrifice was working. The awakening was stalled, perhaps even reversed. The last thing Max perceived was a final, agonizing shriek from the warren, a sound that resonated with primal terror and ancient fury. Then, darkness. Not the darkness of the tunnels, but the darkness of utter oblivion. Epilogue. The silence below. Above ground, the gas lamps of Altenburg continued to glow, oblivious. The city buzzed with its ordinary life, its inhabitants unaware of the silent battle waged in the depths below, or the price paid for their continued ignorance. Beneath the streets, the warren was still. The monstrous pulse that had thrummed for millennia had been muted, its malevolent consciousness thrown back into a deep, agonizing slumber. The shifts in the tunnels had ceased, the impossible geometries solidified into incomprehensible yet still forms. No trace of Max Thorn was ever found. No body, no equipment, no final map. He had vanished, consumed by the unseen world he had illuminated. But for those who knew the whispers, who felt the faint, lingering chill in the deepest parts of Altenburg's forgotten sewers, there was a difference. The air was clearer, less heavy. The silence was deeper, less hungry. Sometimes, in the dead of night, if one listened very carefully, a faint, almost imperceptible echo could be heard from the ancient depths. Not the whispers of the consumed, but a low, steady hum, like a guardian song, reverberating through the vast, dark labyrinth. A final, defiant note of redemption, sung by a forgotten ghost, forever bound to the warren, keeping the ancient horror in its silent, slumbering cage. For now. My friends, do you ever wonder what is actually below your feet? Please let me know in the comments below. What do you think of Max's sacrifice? Until next time, all my love to you, Martha.